if you recall, like we know the PEF had shown interest, or it still shows interest in the J-35, for example. And now when I think about that, is that my assumption would have been that if you were to pursue that future manned unmanned teaming architecture, it would make sense at one level to just procure the whole Chinese stack out of the box, right? Because you would assume that when you get the J-35, you get the KJ-500, you can get like an FN series UAV or what have you. You would assume all that stuff would just work out of the box, but it comes at the drawback and at the cost of you not necessarily knowing what's within that architecture. You're not controlling it. So, for example, if you want to integrate, let's say, a NESCOM weapon or even a NASTAP designed munition or some sort of subsystem, you'd have to, at this level, with what we're talking about, is much more complex than what we have right now. You would have to go and request AVIC that, hey, can you open up the system? Can you integrate this for us? You have to pay either an exorbitant fee or they won't allow it. With this approach, by working with Baykar and essentially, I think even working with Aselsan on the next generation jamming aircraft and what have you, it seems that the PEF, even under the current air leadership, which, I think we've somewhat criticized at times for having a Chinese preference for like in the air defense field, seems to prefer actually taking the traditional, let's develop our original solutions, our original stack approach, even though there might be a risk that it might get complicated, it might take more time. But I think, at least from my angle, it seems that the air headquarters, they still believe in the original solutions approach, right? They're not taking necessarily the Chinese for granted or even the Turks for granted. I think one of the things that, think about it, like if it had been about the so-called simplest solution, it would have arguably been to just go to Turkish airspace and, work on the Khan, and you have access potentially to the Uncut 3. And then again, it's the same thing. It's out of the box. It should work all together. But I think with Baykar, they're saying, hey, we're willing to work with you on these original solutions, right? That are suited to your needs and will work within your industry. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I wanted to touch on is actually the Kizilelma brings an interesting possibility to the arena in the sense that it could be a potential way of tiding over the Pakistan Air Force's strike requirements until they have a solution that they're actually happy with in terms of next generation fighter aircraft. One of the most interesting things I've seen recently is actually, I don't know if you've seen, maybe we can link below, but Leonardo is beginning manned-unmanned teaming demonstrations with the Kizilelma using the M346 LCA. And I think this is quite interesting because it shows you the possibility here that maybe stealthy, low observable next generation deep strike doesn't necessarily have to be from a fifth generation or a sixth generation fighter aircraft. It could very well be a low capability, low cost aircraft controlling something like the Kizilelma and using it to fulfill that requirement. Now, the other interesting thing about the Kizilelma, and compared to other options in the market, is Kizilelma is very capable of operating on its own. It's a complete sensor shooter in one. You've got your own onboard radar, EOTS, targeting, ELIN, everything. You've got everything you need on board and also your internal weapons bay to be able to carry your missiles. So you're able to do everything all at once. Whereas some of these dedicated loyal wingman solutions, they don't offer the ability to do that. You are reliant on an off-board sensor. They're kind of just like missile carriers. So this is the one interesting thing I see with Kizilelma is that you are able to operate it as part of a wingman solution or on its own. And coming back to what I said before with the M346, it's quite interesting because this brings a possibility that, and this is a little bit more broad, but countries that aren't able to access next generation fighter programs could have an avenue to be able to exploit, low observability and stealth aircraft using lower cost aircraft. So, for example, Turkish Aerospace could pitch a solution with the Hurjet and Kizilelma as its loyal wingman to be able to still provide countries with a credible deep strike and a not necessarily fifth generation aircraft program, but a low observable, high capability aircraft which is able to meet those needs. So back to how this applies to Pakistan, however, is we've seen the Pakistan Air Force is not willing to commit to anything yet, which I think is a very, very good decision. If tomorrow the air chief came out and said that we've committed to one program, I'd be very, very concerned because If we look at, for example, the F-35 program as an example, and there's many criticisms of the F-35, but the one thing you can't criticize is its capability. Is it's a very, very capable aircraft, and with capable aircraft, it's capable and next generation sensors and sensors you've not, you've just developed. It's not something that you've got tons of experience in. These next generation sensors are very, very complex and very, very capable, and with that becomes a lot of teething issues and a lot of problems that need to be ironed out. And if tomorrow the Pakistan Air Force came out and said, we've gone and selected the J-35, we've gone all in on Khan, I would be very concerned, because there will be a period, and this is guaranteed, there's nothing else to say about it. It is guaranteed that there will be troubles with the J-35. We might not hear about them because of the way China is, but there will 100% be troubles with the J-35, because that's normal for everything. There were troubles with the JF-17 Block 1, which is why we saw an incremental upgrade in the Block 2. There was no significant capability gain, but it was kind of like ironing out any issues. So there's absolutely going to be stuff like this with the J-35. There's absolutely going to be stuff like this with the Khan. So going all in on these systems to the tip of your spear, which to start with will be unreliable, is a terrible idea. And I'm very, very glad that the Pakistan Air Force isn't committed to either program or any of the programs. So I think this brings a possible interesting third option where the Pakistan Air Force is able to commit to something like Kizilelma, which will also have teething issues, but you're not going all in. It's not as all in as something like a fifth generation fighter, and you're still able to bring a very decent strike capability to the table. And that's where the JF-17B also comes in terms of manned-unmanned teaming. So we see that Leonardo is now demonstrating manned-unmanned teaming via the M346 with the Kizilelma. So what's to say that as part of a PFX, for example, or a local program with Baykar, that we can't see manned-unmanned teaming being demonstrated with the JF-17B and the Kizilelma, giving the Pakistan Air Force that next generation strike capability now or within the near future, as opposed to waiting for a Khan to be ready in 10 years or 15 years, or waiting for a J-35 to have all its issues ironed out in the next 5-10 years as well.
I agree. So you know what? I was taking a look at this. I was taking a look at the source that you had released or you provided for the Leonardo and Baykar manned-unmanned teaming, and it also mentioned that separately Turkish Aerospace did something similar, where they demonstrated the manned-unmanned teaming of the Hurjet with the Uncut 3.
Yeah.
Now, when I see two examples like this, with both having Turkey as the common denominator, what that indicates to me is that the actual core architecture piece of enabling this, the next generation data link, which we know from when we document, the only documented example from within Turkey is the Aselsan program. So we have an article on this that goes into it a little bit, when the first air-to-air test was done by the Kızılelma. But it seems that this is like multiple signs here. The first sign is that the fact that Leonardo is able to also do this testing indicates that this data link is going outside of Turkey for additional testing and validation work. Number two, it wouldn't surprise me that Turkey or Aselsan has potentially offered this or offered help to the PAF in developing something comparable for their own requirements, right? Hence, now you have Baykar coming in, talking to them. Obviously the PAF also is working with Aselsan on the standoff jammer aircraft. I'm not sure if it's going to be the Havas-Soj 1-to-1. It might be like a custom solution, again, leveraging a mix of Aselsan and Pakistani designed solutions. So what this indicates to me is that which is a good sign, is that this architecture is getting tested in multiple places. It's not just getting single sourced, right? It could potentially even get tested. Like if the PAF was to sign on to some sort of, let's say, developmental deal for the Kizilelma, they might have a couple of prototypes that come into Pakistan. They might start testing it out as well and basically start building around it. So it means that the architecture is moving forward. It is gaining some momentum here, which is a very good sign, because we know that if you look around, definitely, obviously the Chinese have the XS3 and they have their own solutions, but again, you have the same issue of like, it's going to be out of the box, to what extent can you even access the internals of it? But you also know that India is developing their own comparable system as well. Obviously, the timelines for that, we don't know for sure, but let's say it aligns, with their UCAV project. So this stuff is moving. Like, you need to get this stuff moving forward, right? And then having it tied to one all-in platform like the Khan, like the J-35, is not a good idea, because again, we don't know how long these platforms are going to take before they're actually ready for combat operations and fully inducted and fully integrated into your system. On top of that, ahead of the next generation fighter, the way I sort of frame the stealth fighter is like it's the capstone. It's the last piece of the entire, like, let's say, sword or whatever. Like you still have to build the base of the sword itself, which is like your 4+4.5 fighter aircraft, 4+4.5 generation fighter aircraft for, let's say, defensive air-to-air operations, for building the capacity mass. And I wonder as well, like the PF might see the UCAV stack, the Kizilelma, as a way of building, as you said, the deep strike capability, but in a more quantitative manner. Because my hunch that one of the differentiators between the Kizilelma and the Uncut 3 might be potentially that Baykar is trying to design the Kizilelma to be relatively more cost optimized and cost effective from the onset. Like they were able to get this prototype going pretty quickly. Yeah, I think even Turkish Aerospace had like an Uncut 3 crash at some point or what have you. So they're going for more complex design, it seemed to me, like something that was more optimized, maybe for like a dual reconnaissance / strike mission.
Yeah.
This seems like this to me is like the Kizilelma seems to be more of a, and I don't want to say expendable. I think it seems to be more of like a platform model around the U.S. Combat Cooperative Air Program, which is the idea was that you would have aircraft that you wouldn't mind necessarily losing. So even though they're capable and what have you, but they're unmanned, you send them out into high risk missions, they get lost. It's not the worst loss to deal with, but they get the mission done. And I think they've modeled their program around that stack, right? So it seems, because you notice how quickly the prototypes came up, you notice how quickly the testing has been going on. You even notice that this is not, like, for Turkish standards, does not seem to be the most controlled technology, right? Like the Kizilelma, it's being marketed like to everybody, like, basically, whereas the Uncut 3 still seems to be, at home under very careful safeguards. So I think there are a lot of factors which are basically pushing this program forward, essentially. And obviously, like, as you said, the demonstration between the M346 FA and the Kizilelma shows that, yeah, you can use like a JF-17B essentially to help basically manage these platforms in that manned-unmanned teaming scenario. So definitely there's a lot of interesting potential, but you also raised some uncertainties and risks, and the big one is the engine. Can you like provide some
Yeah.
thought on that?
Yeah, so obviously the biggest issue we see with the Kizilelma is it's reliant on Ukraine for engines. Now, that's nothing against Ukraine as a supplier, but obviously, as we know, Ukraine is busy with some bigger issues. And so the assurity of engine supply is something which is maybe a little bit more uncertain, and there's not exactly tons and tons of options available. Maybe you could have something, firstly, there's two engine options for the Kizilelma. You've got an afterburning solution, and then you have a non-afterburning solution. So I think there was the AI-25, which is, I believe, also used on stuff like the L-39. But then you've also got the AI-322F, which is the afterburning engine. And that's kind of like, it's kind of a case of the only other aircraft program, the only in production aircraft program to use this engine was the L-15. Now, that's kind of interesting, though, because it does open up this is a bit of a, weird, not necessarily, a bit out there of a take, where the L-15 was obviously designed around this engine, and then later on, the Chinese were able to drop in a domestic engine, which potentially, if Baykar was to, create a custom Pakistan specific solution with the assistance of the Pakistan Air Force, I don't see it potentially being like too out there that we could see a Chinese engined version of the Kizilelma. But that's kind of just like, because there is no other alternative unless the Ukrainians are able to assure some sort of supply, but also assure some sort of support. This is a bit more of like so when we this is like an anecdotal thing, but the AI-25 is used on the L-39 training aircraft, and the L-39 was was bought in large numbers by hobbyists and private pilots in the States, and a lot of them would end up swapping out the engine for a Honeywell unit. And actually, the Pakistan Air Force also on their K-8s use a Honeywell unit, Honeywell engine as opposed to the AI-25. So you kind of the ability to maintain and run those AI-25s became a lot more difficult after the war. Now they send them to, I think it was the Czech Republic, for overhauls and spares and support. So clearly, there is supply side issues from Ukraine, which obviously I don't blame them for. But the issue is it creates uncertainty for Baykar and also for potential export customers that there isn't really many options. That they're kind of at the mercy of what the Ukrainians can produce engine wise. Now, this isn't strictly, there is nothing to say that Baykar couldn't come up with a maybe like a license production agreement like the Indians have for the Russian engines, and with Ukraine to be able to produce these AI 322s in Turkey, because I do think if the Pakistan Air Force was to go for the Kizilelma, it would be a larger, deep strike oriented kind of aircraft, the twin engine afterburning variant. So I think the problem with as with every Turkish program, the problem comes down to the engine and can supply be assured, can supply be guaranteed. And the other thing I just wanted to quickly touch on was, obviously we have the two programs, right, the Uncut and the Kizilelma, and funnily enough, they both use the same engines, so they probably also both run into similar issues, unless the Turks end up developing, or they might be already, I don't have it off the top of my head, but they may have a program to replace the engine on the Anka, which we could end up then seeing applied to the Kizilelma. But I think with the Anka, it's very much focused on like a specific role, being very low observable. It's very optimized for that VLO. It's a all flying wing. Sorry, tailless aircraft. So it's very, very optimized for that kind of stealth role. Whereas I feel like the Kizilelma is kind of like a mixture, because the Kizilelma is designed for a lot more roles. And as I mentioned, it's also capable of operating in a standalone configuration. I don't know off the top of my head the Anka is or will be as capable in like a standalone configuration as maybe something like a Kizilelma, but the Kizilelma is designed to operate as its own independent fighter aircraft. So there's going to have to be trade-offs. You're going to need to be able to carry fuel and more payload, more mission systems, more weapons, all these things. So there's probably trade-offs there that were had to be made by Baykar to be able to ensure that it's able to carry out all the missions that they require of it effectively, or as effectively as possible.
So for what it's worth, Turkish engine industries, or Tuşa's engine industries, is working on two engines basically for the Turkey's UCAV programs. So one is the TF6000, which is basically your AI-25 non-afterburning, or AI-322 or AI-222 non-afterburning equivalent, and then they have the TF10,000, which is basically the afterburning one, which is the AI-3222 equivalent.
Yeah.
So they have these programs in effect. Obviously, we haven't seen any news of flight testing or what have you. So to what extent and how far they are, that is unknown. So I think like at the end of the day, like let's say there is some movement on this program, it could really just be a start, like a developmental start, even for the PAF. There's still a lot of work that has to be done towards building that next generation air warfare stack. And this is just one very critical piece for sure. But again, like the maturation cycle for this could again extend into the 2030s, right? Like the point is they have to get a start sooner than later.
Yeah.
And